All right, welcome back to the channel, and in this video today we're going to be talking about flight numbers. What are those pesky numbers on the discs that you've heard so much about, but maybe if you're new or just never taken the time to learn, you don't really know what they do? We're going to tell you today. Okay, so I got a message the other day and was asking basically what numbers should I look for as a player that's obviously not familiar with the numbers. What numbers should I look for that are going to help my disc get the maximum distance for me? And I kind of explained it, and I thought, that'd actually make a good subject for a video. So I brought a stack of discs out here, and we're going to talk about all these numbers, what they mean, and what they can do for you. Now, I will say before we hop into it, these numbers are not standardized across all manufacturers. It's not an exact science.
Yes, science!
But they will help you understand when you buy a disc what you should expect out of that disc. Everything I do will be talking about a right-handed player from a backhand throw. And the reason why I mention that is because we'll be talking about left and right flights of a disc. And I want you to understand that I'm throwing that disc as a right-handed player on a backhand throw. So I'm putting clockwise spin on the disc. So we're not going to do any forehand stuff, but know that if you're a left-handed player and you're throwing backhand, everything I say for you should be reversed, okay? Or for whatever reason you want to throw forehand, just flip the left and right aspects. We're going to talk about this first number first, obviously, and it's called the speed. And the speed of the disc generally gets attributed to the distance of it. And most of the times that's true. Generally speaking, the further you want to throw a disc, the higher that first number is that you're going to grab. But that's not set in stone. There's going to be plenty of scenarios where you may throw a short distance with a higher speed disc for a certain reason. So I know people hop into the comments already and say that that's not true. But what this number actually really means is that's the amount of speed you need to put on the disc to get it to fly the way that it's designed to fly. So like putters, for example, they're going to have the lower speed numbers on them. They don't require a lot of power to get them to fly straight and flat and stable, so they're going to have the lower speeds, as to where a disc that's meant to go all the way up through that tree line that I can't reach is going to have a higher speed number. It's going to require more power and more speed put onto the disc to get it to fly straight out there and just not immediately dump over and fall over to the left on me, okay? All right, then the second number is called the glide. That glide number is going to range anything from a 1 up to a 7, technically. It's generally going to be more of a 4 or 5. It's kind of rare to fall out of anything that's a 4 or 5 because most of these discs kind of glide the same for the most part. You'll get into some discs, like an MVP Glitch has a 7 glide. I know that Latitude 64, they like to put a lot of 7 glides on their disc. I found that in most of those cases, it's not really true. The Glitch more so, I do think it's a more floaty disc because it's really more like almost like an actual legitimate Frisbee as opposed to a disc. But for the most part, this glide number in my experience is going to be the least important. I never pick a disc because of the glide number. I do pick it because of the speed and the last two numbers we'll talk about. All right, so this third number is my favorite number and the one that drives me the most crazy. So let's talk about its range first off. It's going to range anything from a +1 up to like a -5. And I wish they wouldn't have done this. I wish they wouldn't have made the higher number be negative, but there's a reason for that we'll get into here briefly. But this third one is the turn. Everyone will reference it as how much turn does the disc have. It's really the high speed stability. So when we talk about high speed stability, your disc has basically 2 phases. It's got the high speed, which is, when you first release the disc, because when you first release it, you put the most speed on it. That's when it's flying its fastest. Once you get down towards the end of the flight, when it's slowing down and starting to fall to the ground, obviously it's flying slower. So that'll be the low speed stability. This third number affects your high speed stability, what the disc does when you first release it for like the first half-ish of its flight. And the higher that number, meaning the lower the negative it is, if it's a -5 disc, it's going to have more tendency from our perspective to go to the right. It's going to have more tendency to turn over. It's going to have more turn. So I'm trying to hammer these phrases in so you understand. So again, if you're a new player, a beginner, or if you have a slower arm speed, If you want to get more distance out of a disc, it's generally going to be recommended that you find one that's going to have like a -2 to a -5 type of turn, because those are going to be easier for it early to stay right and just not immediately fall over to the left. Okay. So the fourth and final number is referenced as the fade, and what it really is, it's the low speed stability, how likely it is at the end of the flight from our perspective to fall down to the left, right? So this number is going to range anything from like a 0 up to I think a 5. It's going to be pretty common that you're going to see these numbers fall anywhere from more of like a 1 to a 3 is going to be the most common. So obviously if it has a 1 at the end of its flight, yes, it's going to, all these discs are going to fall to the left no matter what. And let's put a real quick asterisk in there. If anyone's going to hop in the comments and tell me that you can throw the disc on a certain angle and it won't have time to fall left. But let's talk about throwing everything flat. No matter what you do, if you throw a disc flat, eventually, given enough time, it's going to fall off to the left at the end for this perspective. Again, the clockwise throw. So if that number has a 1, it's going to fall a little bit to the left. If that number is a 3 or higher, it's going to fall really hard to the left. Okay? So using those two numbers, the turn and the fade, or the high speed stability and the low speed stability, you can kind of tell what kind of shape the shot's going to get. Okay, it's got a -2 turn, so yeah, it's going to turn over to the right for me in the beginning, and then it's got 2 fades, so it's going to come back to the left kind of the same amount. So before we get demonstrating, let's talk about disc types. And this kind of has a 1-to-1 correlation with that first number, the speed of a disc. There's a little caveat to that, but for the most part and generally speaking, that first number can tell you what type of disc it is. This is my Axiom Envy. It's a putter. It's labeled a putt and approach disc, and it's got a 3 speed, which is pretty low. And then I have a disc by the same manufacturer. This is a Axiom Insanity. It's got a 9 speed, right? And it's labeled a distance driver. That's what they label it. That speed number does correlate to the rim of the disc. If I turn it perpendicular to you, if you look at the disc width or the thickness of it from top to bottom from your perspective, the higher that number gets, the thicker that rim's going to get. So you can see this putter with a 3 speed has a very thin and blunt rim to it. It's very thin top to bottom there, as to where this 9 speed disc, you can see it's got, I think, a 19mm rim on it, as to where this putter probably has like a 12 or 13mm rim on it, something like that. So those numbers do correlate to each other. And that's kind of how you can tell the type of a disc, is by the rim width of it. The wider the rim is, the higher speed it's going to be labeled with, and therefore the wider the rim is, the more speed you're going to need to get that disc to fly, just not immediately fall down to the left on you. So for me, the first, and we'll go from the lowest speed to the highest. And for me, the first disc you have, they're gonna be putters. And when I talk about putters, I'm not talking about putting. So I'm not gonna be talking about anything that I would use as a legitimate putter near the basket where I'm just trying to face the basket and lay it in. I'm talking about something that I'm gonna take and actually throw, where I'm gonna put my arm back and throw out there. Driving putters. These are gonna be anything, for me, it'll range from a 1 to a 3 speed. Now, I personally don't throw a 1-speed putter in my bag. All the ones that I throw are more likely to be 3 speeds. I think I have a wad that's like a 2.5 speed. But for me, putters are anything from a 1 to a 3 speed when we're talking about throwing discs. There's a little bit overlap. For example, I have an MVP Entropy. It's a 4-speed disc and it has the label putt and approach on it. I would honestly make a subcategory of approach discs, and that would be specifically 4 speeds. It would only be 4 speeds. And the reason why I say that, there are some manufacturers that have a 4-speed disc that has a mid-range. Viking disc, for example, when we did the Putter Madness, we allowed a 4-speed disc to be in there because we said anything 1 to 4 was a putter. For me, when we're talking about putters, it's anything 1 to 3 speed, and that's kind of it. That's really the true gist of it. I would say if I were labeling discs and I had power over it, if anything had a 4-speed, I would label it an actual approach disc, approach only. But since that's not the case, what I'm going to do is call anything with a 4 or 5 speed a mid-range. So I have 3 mid-ranges here. They'll all be 5 speeds for me because that's the most common thing that you'll find, is that a mid-range has a 5 speed. And again, if we kind of compare those rims where I talked about, this putter has this really blunt and narrow width rim, where the driver has a very sharp and thick rim. You can tell that mid-range kind of is the hybrid. It has like a blunt rim where it's rounded, but it's a little bit thicker than the putter. Like this is like super thin. This has got a little bit of beef to it as far as the thickness of the rim. So your mid-ranges, they're gonna be that hybrid middle ground. All right, and then after mid-ranges, the next category I break my drivers down into 3 different categories. And this isn't a one-to-one correlation, but it's kind of close, is how important is accuracy compared to distance. So for the lower speed drivers, I call these fairway drivers, they're gonna have a lower speed between 6 to 8. And this is where, okay, yeah, I am starting to get concerned where I need distance more so than like the mid-range or the putter, but my accuracy is more important than the distance. So therefore I stick to a 6 to 8 speed, and I call these personally fairway drivers. Most companies will also call these fairway drivers. This one, I mean, these are all Axiom and MVP discs, so they do call theirs fairway drivers, but some companies may just call it a driver. But anyway, 6 to 8 speed, it's a driver. I call it fairway driver because I'm considering accuracy to be more important than pure distance. Then moving up to the next category on this is going to be anything from a 9 to a 10 speed, so 9 and 10 speeds, and I call these control drivers. And this is where, okay, now distance is starting to become more important, but it's not necessarily more important than accuracy. This is kind of that middle ground. I want equal accuracy and equal distance, and a lot of companies will call these control drivers as well. But for me, again, that's anything that's a 9 or a 10 speed. Again, you'll be able to tell I'm throwing all MVP manufactured discs at least. So everything on here, they call these distance drivers, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for my purposes, I'm not gonna throw a 9 speed if my entire purpose is pure distance. I throw a 9 or a 10 speed if I want distance, I want good and increased distance, but I still need some reliable accuracy. And then moving up to the final category, this is gonna be anything that's 11 speed or higher for me. These are what I call distance drivers. This is where, okay, I got like an open field. I'm at Wright State on hole 13. This is a wide open field and I need pure distance, and I'm not worried if I accidentally pull it right or I accidentally let it go early left so much. Obviously, we always want our accuracy to be as good as possible, but distance is the most important factor on these discs, anything 11 speed or higher. All right, so now that we've talked about what the numbers mean, I've told you about how the speed correlates to each type of disc that I personally throw. I have selected 3 discs in each one of the categories: putters, mid-range, fairway driver, control driver, and distance driver. And I've selected ones that have understability, neutral stability, and overstability. And I'm going to try my best out here in this field. It's actually a really nice day. I probably got about a 4 or 5 mile an hour headwind. I'm gonna try my best to throw them flat and straight and put the appropriate amount of power on it per the disc. So you're gonna see the putters, I'm barely gonna throw them. The distance drivers, I'm gonna put everything I have into them. And I'm gonna try to throw them as flat as possible so I can tell you what the numbers are, and then you can see for yourself how those numbers correlated to how the disc flies. The first one up, I'm gonna go from least stability to highest stability. We're doing putters first. So I'm gonna be throwing an MVP spin as the least stable, a Streamline Pilot, which is pretty neutral, and then an Axiom Envy, which will be the most overstable out of the putters. So you can see how that kind of just gently turned to the right because I didn't throw it very hard, gently turned to the right the whole way. So I'm gonna try to throw this Pilot straight and see if I can get it to go straight the majority of the flight and then just have a soft left fade. There we go. We're gonna go to the most overstable out of my putters, which is an Axiom Envy. This has a 3-speed, 3 glide, 0 turn, and 2 fade. I didn't release that flat. I actually released that on an anhyzer, which got a great flight out of it. But you can see how even doing that, it kind of came back a little bit. We're moving up to the mid-ranges. This is an Axiom Paradox. It is very understable. So if you're looking for a roller, Axiom Paradox is good for it. That was a good roll. I think we're still demonstrating the purpose. Next one up is the Axiom Hex. So there it is, turning to the right, and now at the end, starting to flat out and lean left. All right. Moving on to the most overstable of my mid-ranges is the Axiom Pyro. So you can see how that going out there, I let it go pretty flat, and immediately it got up on that tilted left angle, and kind of the whole flight, even though it was going straight when it had speed, the 0 turn, the moment it started to slow down a little bit, it started fading and going out to the left. So I think that was the best demonstration so far. MVP signal, pretty identical to that Paradox at the mid-range. The only difference is this has a little bit wider and therefore a little bit sharper of a rim. I expect a very similar flight where I'm gonna throw this out there and it's probably gonna turn to a roller. So there you go, you can see it turned out there to the right. And again, if you know how to throw rollers, which I don't, I mean, that would have been a pretty decent, it got right back out to the middle because the roll brought it back out to the middle, but I'm not good at throwing rollers. All right, let's move up to an Axiom Crave. This is one of the first discs I got back in the day. I love this disc. I think I might have let that go on a little bit of, oh, that's bombing. That was a good shot. I might have let that go a little bit on what's called an anhyzer angle. And again, I don't want to get into the angles, but I might have let that go a little bit more on that angle to make it go right. MVP Resistor. Now, this isn't the exact one. I have a pink one in my bag that is my baby. But this one should do good in this wind. The more stable a disc is, the more fade and less turn. Said that backwards. The less turn and the more fade that it has, 3rd and 4th numbers, the better it'll do in that wind, because where that wind pulled that Crave over to the right, this one isn't going to let the wind do it to it. This is going to be nice. Oh yeah. Sorry, but there's a little bit of excitement for me. So nice. I'm throwing these a little bit nose up, which is fine. But I really liked how that flew. So first one up, Axiom Insanity. Yeah, so I turned that one way over. That's probably me again. So moving up to the neutral spot for the control drivers is my MVP Tesla. Thanks, sis. All right, so moving up from that is the Axiom Fireball. Again, this is a control driver, 9-speed, only 3.5 glide, 0 turn, 3.5 fade. And this is one of the first day I went and bought discs. This was in my batch of my first 4 discs I bought. This one is ridiculously stable. It's going to definitely go left. I could throw it out there on the biggest angle I want, and it's gonna go left for me no matter what. So we'll try to throw this flat and demonstrate how much left this will go. Thanks, sis. So you can see the whole time I let that go pretty flat, and it immediately got up there on that left downward angle and just dumped over. Not mad about the distance though, considering. All right, my last batch of drivers, and I'll let you go. These are my distance drivers. First one up is going to be my MVP Orbital, and again, I don't bag this disc, and it's a special edition because for whatever reason, remind me of my oldest grandson, don't think things through.
You know, you remind me of my oldest grandson. You don't think things through.
Thanks, sis. So you can see that one immediately got that right angle and just went into the ground. Next up, again, the theme of the day, me picking the wrong disc. Mint disc Longhorn. So this is going to be more in the neutral category. And I can tell you right now, I threw that on Anheuser, but look how it fought out of it. Yep, last one, and then Illyria gets to throw some discs. I also bought this the first day I bought discs, so you can see how much of a noob I was buying a Fireball and an Axiom Thrill. I was such a noob, and I relied on these numbers so much that when I first bought them, because this one doesn't have the numbers on it, I wrote them on the back in the day. 11403. This is a beef monster. I'm gonna throw it flat, and it's gonna dump out left pretty hard. There we go. So I think that was probably one of my best throws. That felt pretty flat, pretty powerful relative to how I've been throwing everything. You can see it went out there straight, but held that little left angle. And once it started slowing down, that fade kicked in, brought it down to the ground to the left. All right, so I got my helper here now. I've thrown all those discs out there. I tried my best to throw them flat. Some of them I probably didn't. We'll see in post. I'm not gonna try to make excuses. I'm not a professional, but I did my best to try to demonstrate what the numbers are and how they affect the flight of the discs. Again, I'll probably make a follow-up video talking about hyzer, anhyzer, and nose angles, because that completely changes the game. In my opinion, it's not complete science, but it's pretty scientific. Aspects of disc golf are why I have fallen in love with the game. But that wraps up for today's video. I'm gonna take my helper out here and we're gonna go out in the field and hopefully find all the discs I threw. But let me know down in the comments, and while you're down there, if you found this video useful, make sure to give it a like. And we'll see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye. All right, let's turn off the camera and go pick up some Frisbees.
How about you pick me up and then I can be